I'm Roniel,
I'm DaRon.
and today is going to be interesting. We're going to do a continuation of threat modeling, or the threat modeling series that we've been doing so far.
The next step that we need to do when we're threat modeling is identify the threat actors, agents, and vectors. In order to do this, what we're doing is we're selecting all of those actors, agents, and vectors that either would attack the system or would be a conduit through which someone may attack the system. When we talk actors, what we're really talking about are people, whereas your agents are things like malware. Agents can also be things like water. That particularly becomes important, obviously, if you have flooding or if you have hurricanes, if you have something like a sprinkler system that decides to go off and just inundate your servers with water, things of that nature. Whereas your vectors are just a conduit through which someone attacks. The vector itself can be anything from hardware to software to some other kind of deal. And in that particular case, that vector is a component of your system. Alternatively, it can be an external component. A vector, for example, that would be external would be a third party supplier or maybe your third party maintenance if you, for example, use IBM to help manage your servers, or you're using Xerox printers and they come and they maintain their printers. Well, that is another conduit, therefore, it's another vector. When we are doing this, you have to always think the means, motives, and opportunities that would impact your system. So when we talk motives, we're really saying, why is it that this threat actor would attack my system? How is it that this threat agent would attack my system? And when we say how, we don't want to get bogged down in details of, oh, they're going to use this or that. It's how, as in, how are they going to get to us? Are they going to get to us through this threat vector or through that threat vector? Or all of these different threat vectors, whatever it happens to be. We're really interested in what means, what chances, what means does that threat actor or threat agent happen to have in order to do this attack, and then how might they do it? Very high level without getting into threats. So, when we're doing any of this stuff, you need to keep in mind any likelihood and impact things that would correspond to a given threat actor or threat agent, and of course, the threat vector. So, what is the likelihood that a nation state is going to attack my system? It could very well be that that likelihood is absolutely negligible, in which case we don't want to focus necessarily on nation state early on. That's something that we would hit in another threat modeling exercise. And that again is key. We've talked about it several times, but threat modeling is an iterative process. Never try to pack everything in a single session. Everyone will instead become bogged down more likely than not in details. They will then get tired of the activity and it just won't continue in the future. Whereas if we break it up and you have that likelihood, you have that impact, and we use that to rationalize this is why we're examining this threat actor, this threat agent, or this threat vector at the moment. There's a high probability because the API is public that someone might use this as a conduit to attack us. There is a high probability that we will have a disgruntled employee, not because we're a bad company, but because we have a lot of people. So if you have a lot of people at your company, high probability you will have at least some disgruntled employees. If you are, for example, the federal government, there's a high probability that you'll have an employee, be they a service member or civil servant or what have you, who happens to, for ideological reasons, for notoriety or fame or what have you, they're going to access your system in an illicit way or steal that data and then, you know, send it to the kids on Discord just to show what a big man you are. The other thing that you have to keep in mind with all of this, whenever we're talking about our threat actors specifically, is that they aren't gods. I cannot emphasize this enough. For as much, Roniel, as I believe we wind up hearing this in our industry, that the nation states are so incredibly dangerous that highly skilled professionals within our industry are gods and can do anything. That's simply not true. And when you let that ideology and that claim proliferate, it makes it much more difficult to properly determine the means and the opportunity.
What?
And
We're not gods?
no, not yet.
What? I thought they were, thought they were gods. I mean, you let anybody else tell you they're gods. And also, another point I wanted to kind of go into is something that you're saying. But I think people don't take away or look at the fact that there is a possibility of internal threats inside of threats. Every time we have an engagement or you're talking to somebody, oh no, I don't think that would happen. I've never seen it. I mean, are you serious? How many times did that happen? And if you go look at our one of our episodes before, we talked about the system admin going rogue, which was an insider threat. So you always got to take an account of insider threats. You just never know when that's going to happen, and people don't actually take into account to that. So I just really, really want people to understand that that is a possibility.
That's a really good point also to bring up on a couple of different fronts. I think the first front obviously is if you ignore it, you can't protect against it. And then the second is when and we mentioned this before, when we run a penetration test, when we do forensics activity, when we do anything, really threat modeling needs to be part of that process. It may not be formal, and it may be fairly on the fly, not necessarily as documented and regimented as what we've talked about thus far, but you have to sit there. If I come into an environment, I need to be able to quickly assess who are the kinds of people who would want to attack the system. And it doesn't matter if I'm blue team, red team, if I'm digital forensics and I'm coming into an investigation. I have to understand all of these things. I have to understand that motive. I have to understand what opportunity they had and then the means. Because I'll give you a good example. And this is actually in the opposite direction of what you're talking about. I had an instance that we'll talk about at some later date where someone had a compromise and they were dead certain it was an insider threat. And I kept telling them all of the evidence says that this wasn't insider, that this was external, and that this was organized crime in this particular case. It was bank fraud. There was a lot to it. We had a lot of evidence, and they would not believe that this wasn't insider. They were so hell bent on it has to be an insider because it's the only way they could have gotten in. And this is actually an unusual situation because it's the exact opposite where they aren't saying that attackers are gods. They're saying no one else could enter the system. And to exactly what you're talking about, they are so hell bent on our gates are so solid. The only way this could have happened was through an internal threat. And that is a weird thing because I had never seen that before. Never. Everyone else, it's always the exact opposite where, like what you're saying, it's we're going to ignore that insider threat. We're going to hyper focus on this had to be an external job. I've actually had a couple instances where people were fairly certain it was insider or that it was a competitor that really knew their stuff well and was allegedly putting in spies. And they had legitimately, I will say, in the case of the second organization, they had actually legitimately found individuals who were actively involved in a corporate espionage scheme for China. But that's rare, and at least in their case, they were willing to listen. And so when the evidence guided in a different direction, they actually moved in that direction. But you're exactly spot on. I think far too often we blind ourselves. We think we have good hiring practices. We think we have a good work environment and everyone loves each other here and all of this other stuff. How could anyone ever hate our company? How? But I mean, that's not reality.
No, that's true. It's not. But I think people, the more we educate people and make them aware of these things, I think it'll probably get better. But that's the problem with people not understanding the threats and vectors, as you said, that that we have in this industry and to companies in general. But also the lack of people being aware of these things and also knowing how to threat model
Yeah.
and see these things. That's a problem too. I bet you a lot of people miss that as one of those vectors or things that could happen. So, and every time I hear it, even for people who do quote unquote QA, they'll sell you that no, there's no such thing, or hey, dude, we no, that's not a big deal. If they already did that, no, that is one of your biggest threats to your company is insider threats. You
Yes.
may think that, oh, they can't do this. Why would they want to do this? Somebody inside that knows your architecture, knows your development, your framework, everything is going to be your biggest problem because especially those system admins or the people that how many companies give you admin rights, they give you God rights to
Yes.
everything. You don't even need it. And that one person decides, oh, I'm mad. You didn't pay me what I want, or I was supposed to get promoted and you didn't give me that. So hey, I'm gonna go off and just do whatever I want to your whole thing. And then
Yes.
now everything went shit. So this
Yes.
definitely a big thing.
Yes. Yes. You are exactly right.
With that being said, I'm Roniel.
I'm DaRon.
And if you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. And until the next time.
Have fun.